Okay, any other questions? Hold on, let me look at the Zulip. Wait a sec. Zulip. No other questions? Okay, let's thank Antigone again. Thank you. Brilliant talk. Right. Next up is Mads, who's going to talk about putting MPC to use.
Yep, hi.
If it didn't have a use already. Okay. Do you want to check you can share your screen?
Let's see if this is gonna work.
Okay, can you check that you can go from one to the other? Back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so
Okay.
it's up to you, and you've got about 25 minutes. Go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for that introduction. And I'm going to be talking about putting MPC to use. And I've got a slightly different background than most people here. I'm from the HCI community. So my name is Andersen, and I did this work in collaboration with my colleague Laura Lynggaard-Nielsen here at the Alexander Institute. So just a bit of background about why I find this whole area interesting. You know, I started working here around 5 years ago, and you know, like the Alexander Institute, as some of you are probably familiar with, and like I have been working with MPC technology for a long time, but we're not really seeing a large pull from industry to actually like make use of our technology and the framework that we are developing. So at least from my point of view, I've been very interested in trying to look a little bit at, you know, why hasn't MPC had this breakthrough yet? It's existed for more than like 30 years, but we still really have to push this technology. Just to give you a bit of context to the work I'm presenting here, the user studies and the results, they were carried out as part of the Scalable Oblivious Data Analytics project, SODA for short, which was an EU Horizon 2020 project that finished last year. And we collaborate with Philips, Aarhus University, University of Göttingen, and Technical University of Eindhoven. So the focus of the user studies in this project were that, you know, how do we use MPC as a technology for data analytics with an emphasis on like explorative data analytics, like how can we make that work? So how do we apply MPC to real world problems? And the context that we looked in was basically like you have several parties who have different bits of the data, and they all want to find a way to collaborate and get something out of this calculation or several calculations that you want to do in the MPC system. And in the project, we looked at MPC from two different human perspectives. One, you know, the project was, I guess I need to say that was carried out as in the health industry. You know, how do we make use of like personal data in the health industry? So we've got the people who contribute their personal data into an MPC system, which I'll refer to as data subjects. And the other perspective is the people who make use of this personal data in some sort of MPC system. It can be like a data analyst who wants to, you know, calculate an average or something like that. And I'll refer to that as an end user. And this talk is going to be like a summary of all the different user studies. We're currently like writing up some of this stuff for HCI conferences. But we basically did this by having two subcontractors. We had Lancaster University in the UK and Aarhus University Hospital in Denmark. So we wanted to get this, you know, two different perspectives on it from two slightly different cultures, even though like both Denmark and the UK have public funded health systems. In terms of data subjects, we looked in Lancaster, we looked at people with dementia plus their carers, because we wanted to get like a group that might have special needs and ideas about data. And at Aarhus University Hospital, we looked at type 1 and type 2 diabetics and pregnant women with diabetes. In terms of the end users, in the UK, we looked at the researchers working with data related to dementia. And in Denmark, we actually interviewed and held workshops with a broad range of analysis from different areas of the health domain, from like research doctors to, you know, administrators at hospitals, and people from the public sector in like at a higher level. So when this application was written up like 4 years ago, there was this idea of, well, you know, maybe the thing we need is a better interface. You know, so for the data subjects, this is from the actual application. It was written that the consent control component deployed at the data controllers allows data subjects to control how their information is processed. By presenting the privacy guarantees and options of SODA in an understandable way, this component aims to make data subjects comfortable with their data being processed. In a similar manner with the end users, we wanted to do an iterative prototyping approach based on workshops in which a new user experience and/or tool surrounded data analysis is created based on previous results and is shown and tested with end users. So again, we wanted to create something, you know, which would work with these people. And in terms of the end users, like our initial ideas were something like, you know, a lot of these data like analysis at the hospitals and statisticians, they tend to work in a tool like SPSS. So we had this initial idea of like, how do we make a plugin for SPSS which allows people to work with data in an MPC system. And we had this initial idea of maybe blurring out some of the fields to make this like give, you know, like the perspective that this data was available, but was not able to be seen. However, as we started, you know, doing our interviews and our workshops, we found out that this lack of tools and this lack of an interface for the data subjects were not really what was preventing like MPC adaptation in the health sector. So what we really got to a point where we realized that there were a number of things we really needed to understand about the nature of data analysis in this sector and how that impacts the applicability of MPC technology. So instead, we actually ended up looking more at like, what are the obstacles in data analytics in the health sector today? And how does that impact MPC being used in this context? And what are the potentials of MPC use in this context? So just to sum up the key results that we found that, you know, this is not just MPC, but in general in like the whole big data community, that tends to be this idea that data is just something that's out there. But we realized that through our studies that data is not just data. We also found that this black box nature of MPC can be a benefit in some cases, but often it's also an obstacle to what people want to do. And we also found that there's still a need to build trust between the participating stakeholders, even though MPC is deployed. So to go into details with these things, well, we found that you can't just tap into data. It's not just, you know, like this hospital has this database and another one in like another region in Denmark or maybe another country has this data, and we just like trust that, you know, we can just pull those things together and just use it. As one participant said, when you worked with laboratory analysis, you know that a number isn't just a number. So we really found that it's actually quite difficult to do this, because the data is often broken. Even though it's often perceived as something objective, raw, and pure, it's created, it's maintained, sometimes missing, sometimes, and a lot of it, like when this data is broken, it's usually being repaired through a social and technical process. So just examples from our interviews here. We had one doctor who talked about the blood glucose level. Was it measured in the home or at the clinic? What was the person doing while it was taken? Where were the results logged? Was it manually or automatically? And all these things had a lot of impact on whether or not he actually felt comfortable using the data. Another doctor like mentioned, well, men carry their phones in their pocket, women keep them in their bags. Since EPJ, which is the Electronic Patient Journal in Denmark, since that was implemented, one guy said there's been a decline in heart failures. So, and you know, of course, he didn't believe that was just because everything got better, but there was some sort of thing that happened in the digitalization that they couldn't really explain. And in terms of diabetes, when they do classifications of diabetics, they know that 15% of the overall classifications, like type 1 or type 2, are wrong. And if you go into more details, there's a lot of like subcodes there, like 70% of the diagnosis codes are incorrect. So you really need to know this about the data. And another fun example is that the company that we talked to, in one of the systems that they interacted with, they found out that, well, when children turn 2, all of a sudden they weigh 14 tons. And that was, of course, because, you know, as soon as they turned 2, they went from like measuring grams to kilograms. But without that knowledge, and if you just got the raw data, that this actually, the unit actually also changed, you might get into trouble here. So what we found is that data analytics is often a lot of hidden work. So there's really a lot of need for a better like data format standards, because there's a lot of time being used in cleaning and moving data around. And this is one of the things where they really saw the benefits of having a system where you didn't have to like move it around all the time. And we also found that there's a really big need for metadata. Like you really need to know how the data was collected, what quality it is, and all these things surrounding the data before you're actually able to use it. We found that there are some potential usages of MPC here, that instead of like of thinking about like this, like, you know, inspecting the data visually, which is how the people we talk to would normally work, and which would be an obstacle into not using MPC in their work. They found, we talked to them about like maybe having some sort of idea of using MPC to actually calculate some metadata about the data instead of giving access to the data. We also talked to some researchers who actually, to be able to publish their results, needed to publish a data set. And in that sense, it's not really, you would think that it might not be useful to like use MPC at all, but they did find that, you know, a lot of the hidden work for them is to write like different applications to acquire data. So if they could get some sort of preliminary result in, you know, whether or not their theory was right or wrong, they could kind of get, you know, assess whether or not it would be worth spending the time to actually apply for getting the data. But what we really found was that you really need to look at working with data in a different way if you want to, you know, deploy MPC in something like this, because a lot of it is explorative, and then all the problems with like data leakage if you don't control how many queries and what kind of queries you run after each other. There's also a concept of trust that we got some insight to in doing these studies, because MPC is often to people like me who's not a cryptographer explained as this, you know, like we use MPC because we want to eliminate the need for this trusted third party. And this text is taken from one of the companies working with MPC, which says MPC provides cryptographic services without any reliance on sharing secrets with anyone, including a trusted third party, which is subject to compromise. And of course, this is all true, but there's still a need for trust, and you really need to think about like how we communicate about trust in something like this. Because, you know, if somebody sets, and this is something we found in the workshops with the data subjects here, is that, you know, they instantly started, when we presented like an idea of an MPC system that you know, took data from sources that made sense to them with and this was diabetics in this sense. We found that they really didn't ask much about what the technology did and how the technology met all these guarantees, but they started talking a lot about but who is like running the system? Whereas like are you running the system? Is the insurance company running the system? Who's actually running it? And in the sense of running it in MPC, of course, it's different places, but at some point somebody sat down and implemented the system, and they really wanted to know who's accountable for the guarantees that we presented to them. And in that sense, there's actually some sort of trusted party. For example, if we were at the Alexander Institute were to deploy an MPC system, well, and we would have parties that we would trust wouldn't collude. Well, we still would have to implement the system, so there still need to be put quite a lot of trust in us. And of course, it's not trusting us with the same thing as the data, but there's still a lot of trust in being put into us. Because in crypto, there's a lot of trust in the correctness of a mathematical like proof. Like different protocols ensure that it can be guaranteed that you can't break the protocol as long as a specified amount of participants do not conspire. And of course, there's different scenarios like malicious and semi-honest, and so there's different things there. But those are really difficult for like normal people to understand. So we found that trust in like a like in an honest majority setup indicates that you don't really need to trust the other parties, but you still need to trust that they provide good data. But as it's often presented in literature, like if you don't trust that these corrupt parties follow the protocol and will try to get like the input data out, like how can you trust that they won't try to corrupt the output by providing like bad data? Because Giddens wrote that trust is confidence in or reliance on some quality or attribute of a person or thing, or the truth of a statement. So again, you put a lot of trust into personal things here. So we found that again, as I said before, the participants weren't really that interested in like how MPC worked and what it could guarantee. They just wanted somebody to say, this is anonymous and we guarantee it. And then we had a discussion with some participants about how would that look for you? Who would you trust in this? Would you trust us? Would you trust the hospital, the insurance company? And through like a strange discussion, we actually ended up with, they could all agree on the EU, which is probably not representative at all, but at least they really wanted to put the trust in some sort of institution rather than the fact that we did our job correctly, or that a mathematician proved something. So related to what I said before, like, I really want my competitors to benefit from my investment in training this model, or do I want to get the benefit of them reacting on the output, which I have corrupted by corrupting my input, and then not reacting to it myself? You have to trust that the other people, like the other participants, don't do something like that. And then again, there's also people who like subconsciously type in wrong numbers, like they don't really think about it. They make mistakes. You have to trust that they don't do this. We also found that a lot of the data analysts put a lot of trust in looking at the data, like visually inspecting the data and trying to get ideas of what they could actually do with it. And when we started talking about like, oh, would you benefit from getting like data from another country, there's a lot of like distrust in that other countries would necessarily live up to the same standards as you did yourself. And they were really worried about this black box property of not being able to actually inspect the data from another country. So there is really a need to inspect the quality of the other parties, at least in this explorative medical sense, or that we looked into. We also came up upon this interesting thing, and it showed up at several workshops independent of each other, both in Denmark and in the UK, where we present this technology as we can eliminate the need to trust these other parties. And we actually found that introduced the fact that we started talking about that you didn't have to trust other institutions, introduced a lot of distrust at the participants. So like people said something like, why should we distrust the NHS, like the health system in the UK? We also like had somebody say not even the craziest lawyer would take it to this level, like needing the guarantees that we could do with implementing an MPC system. And also somebody who said we don't have any clients who require this level of security. So introducing distrust can really have some consequences on trust, and it can sound a little bit counterintuitive, but this is really how people deal with trust. So that kind of brings me to the end of my talk, and I just want to sum up with the key results here. And I can say that what we're really trying to work with at the moment is to try to create like a model and a language to talk about like the properties of MPC between different groups, for like between cryptographers and like people who work as data analysts, and just people who need to understand the system in general, because especially a word like trust is being understood very differently in different communities, and that can have an impact on how you talk about these things. So I'm currently really interested at your perspectives on all of this, and I'd really like if any of you would like to participate in an interview. It can be done like remotely, and we've engaged a lot of different stakeholders so far, but we haven't talked to like the MPC experts, and they last around half an hour. And if you're interested, please, either in participating or just want to know more about the work that we've done, please send me an email. On my email address is here, and I'll post it on the chat thing afterwards. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions? Let's have a look. Q&A.